Good morning. The Joint Board Audit Committee meeting is now in session. Pam, roll call please.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Mrs. Campbell?
Present.
Mr. Susan?
Present.
Mrs. Escobar?
She's absent. She will be joining us as soon as she can.
Okay. And Mrs. Belford?
Present. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Dr. Mullins, I believe you are starting us off this morning.
Good morning. I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce a new individual around the table with as much joy and exuberance as I can, because it's been a road the last few months without a chief financial officer. But Cindy Lisinski is our new CFO. A distinguished career in the military as a finance director, budget director, chief financial officer, with budgets of like magnitude as ours, and some of the same kinds of funding complexities for the federal government that we experience at the state level. She has done a fabulous job of jumping in with both feet, learning, getting familiar with her staff and our district and how things operate, and just already made valuable contributions to the team and our processes. So, Ms. Lisinski, welcome again.
All right, thank you.
And welcome to the Audit Committee. We'll bring you along the way. So
I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
All right, and I think at this point we are turning the meeting over to Mr. Art Edwards, our Audit Committee Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
good morning. Good morning.
There's one other person that you didn't introduce.
Oh.
Yes.
My
Met
apologies.
a few, but
My apologies. Also, I didn't realize that's right. We have not met since last year, November. Mr. Paul Gibbs, our new general counsel, comes to us from previously general counsel in Marion County. He has been on board since January 6th, and there's been a few things that have come up. So his timing was impeccable. But he's done just a fabulous job of hitting the ground running and catching up with all of the things that are going on. As you can imagine, most recently spent a lot of time reviewing our processes around just a little thing that's getting some news attention these days, CV-19 as we finally call it, but been a valuable part of the team already. So welcome. And Audit Committee.
Okay, what we can do is...
Mr. Edwards, is Mr. Slate there?
Yes, I was going to get him.
Oh, okay. We were just doing a round of introductions. I thought he was getting excited to introduce him, and I was like, wow, this is the most excited introduction that I've ever seen. So I was waiting for Mr. Slate over here to be introduced. So didn't want him to be forgotten.
Okay.
Mr. Edwards, I'm sorry, can I interrupt one time? Is Wally not part of the committee anymore?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
He's having a procedure.
Ms. McDougall, he's in the hospital having some medical testing.
Oh, I did not know that.
He was unable to be here. He
Okay.
emailed me yesterday.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, and we will introduce ourselves as we go through the presentation. That's okay.
Didn't mean to jump the gun on you, Mr. Edwards.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, next page. We're basically going to cover 12 or 13 items in terms of what we as an audit committee are responsible for and what we do. Initially, we're going to talk about our financial oversight responsibilities. We're going to introduce the committee members, talk a bit about the reporting structure, the how the external, internal auditors all kind of play into this whole mix. Talk about how we implement internal audit. The audit universe is this paper here that shows it's kind of a historical document as well as a look forward. Then we're going to look at where we're focusing this year and highlights from the past year and what we're hoping to achieve in 2020, and talk about some corrective actions and remediations that we have ongoing, and we'll end shortly thereafter. Go to the next page. There's an interconnection between the audit committee in terms of an interface with the external auditors, the internal auditors, and district staff. And it is our collective responsibility to make sure that we implement fiscally sound, fiscally good processes for the citizens of Brevard County. The audit committee members is myself, Wally, and we'll go through and do a little more formal introductions on the next page. And of course, Mrs. Deskovich was the ex officio school board chair last year, and Mrs. Belford is this year's school board chair. We operate under school board policy 6705 and school board policy 6700. If you flip to the very next page, this is where we introduce ourselves. My name is Art Edwards. I'm retired from over 45 years working in the space program, manned space programs. I worked for Apollo, I worked shuttle, did a number of things. I'm a degreed engineer, but I ended up being the corporate safety manager for United Space Alliance, responsible for environmental safety and health across the state of Florida for USA. I also hold a general contractor's license, and I do some other things. I've been on the audit committee for over 12 years. Mr. Lust, if you could just come introduce yourself.
Yes, I'll do that. Retired from Brevard County Board of County Commissioners after being there for 31 years. Just told Mr. Slade I tried sitting out for 3 months and not doing anything like to be really retired. It did not work for me. So I started to work for a not-for-profit here in the county called Career Source Brevard. I've been there for almost 10 years now. And I've been on this particular board learning lots every year for the last, I think I've been here 7 years.
My name is Jim Slate. I'm had 40 years experience in various positions as far as accounting is concerned, both public and private accounting. I'm retired from Health First. I worked with them for about 18 years, and don't hold it against me, but I was responsible for their billing and collections operation, and a lot of other things that go along with that too. I'm happy to be part of the board.
I'm Nicole Colbert. I represent District 3. I have 3 boys in the school board, so I have a vested interest in making sure we are fiscally responsible to our community. I'm a CPA, and I am a controller in private industry right now, and I was in public before that.
Okay, and our missing member is Wally Mahid. I've known Wally for many, many years. We worked together at the Space Center. He was one of the engineering guys on the team. And he's been on this board for, I guess, a year and a half, maybe 2 years, somewhere there. Okay, if you go to the next page, we kind of have a top-down structure when we look at our reporting scheme. We all report to the citizens of Brevard County. Immediately under the citizens of Brevard County, we have the school board and the superintendent's cabinet, and the quality control function, which we're looking at. The audit committee reports directly to the school board, and the internal and external audit functions report to the audit committee. And of course, the school board attorney reports to the school board of Brevard County. Okay, next page. In terms of external auditors, in 2014, we recommended to the school board for more Stephen Lovelace to be selected as the external auditor for the district. And this was a combination of an extensive RFP process. In fact, it's a process that we, along with members of the district, developed. And it is comprehensive, and I think it will qualify as a best practice. At any rate, a 3-year contract was awarded in 2014, including 4 optional 1-year extensions. The Florida Auditor General comes in every 3 years and does an audit of an external audit of Brevard County records. The AG function started their audit fiscal year 2019. I think some of that is still ongoing. We have previously recommended to the school board to exercise 1-year options to facilitate the Auditor General work in concert with the external auditor to kind of streamline the process. And this has proven to be very, very beneficial. The things that MSL have been able to contribute in terms of little gaps and holes otherwise would have probably consumed a lot of time from the AG. In October 2019, MSL gave us an unqualified audit opinion, clean audit for the 2019 fiscal year. And in conjunction with that, members of the audit committee completed a fraud awareness questionnaire. In terms of the internal auditors, in 2018, the audit committee recommended to the school board that RSM be selected as the district's internal auditor. The recommendation again was the culmination of a fairly extensive RFP process. We looked at a number of other firms and determined that RSM was the one to go with. A 3-year contract was awarded with 3 optional 1-year extensions, and that was based on the recommendation by the audit committee to the school board. The initial term of the RSM contract ends in July 2021. The fiscal year 2019-2020 total budget approved for the internal audit contract is $199,500. In addition, there's some almost $117,000 available for other internal audit services. I might add that the price that we paid for internal audits has been fairly constant over the years, and I think this is a credit to RSM as well as us working together to diligently determine the things that needs to be looked at and working to get those done at a reasonable cost to the taxpayers. We just took a bit with the performance of RSM. They have historically done everything we needed them to do. They provide all of the reporting that we need for our committee members, and they're very timely in their response to audits. So how do we do audits? If you look at the next page, we basically use a 4-component matrix. And that matrix, it looks at functions with high exposure and high priority. And those are the things that typically would keep senior leadership and the school board awake at night. If you look at the matrix, beginning on the bottom left-hand corner, those are items with low exposure and the risk coverage is fairly low, the likelihood of occurrence. So we basically monitor those functions. If you put your attention on the right-hand bottom side, moderate exposure with maybe a high risk, we do some self-assessments on a rotational basis. As you go up to the high level, that's where we get into the stuff that we got to pay a lot of attention to, where the risk impact is high and the likelihood of occurrence is beginning to be high. And over on the right-hand side, those are the big dogs. That's where we have to put the most attention. Am I going too fast? Okay, the next page, there's a lot on this chart. It's very comprehensive, but what it shows basically is within the world of internal auditing, we look at compliance, we look at financial management, we look at performance, operational performance, and we also have done some deep dives into information technology. This is all done based on this matrix. And this chart is something that when you have absolutely nothing else to do, you can kind of go down and read through it in detail. But the point of the matter is we spend the bulk of our time in operational performance. But we do hit those other areas when needed. And again, it's based on a risk and exposure. The internal audit universe, as we've said before, is this handout. This is something that has evolved over the years. I guess we started this probably back in 2008, maybe, somewhere in that time frame. And there's been a maturation process, but it allows us to have a visual so we can fairly easily see, one, what we've done previously, where our attention needs to be, and to plan forward on an annual basis. We basically have 5 different items that we focus on from an internal audit standpoint. We have district-wide audits, we have individual function audits, we have cycle audits, we have follow-ups, and then we have other audit projects that comes along from time to time. The next page looks at follow-up audits. Basically, this is a requirement from the International Standards for Professional Practice for Internal Auditing, and that's Performance Standard 2500. The follow-up audits look at open issues from previous audits to make sure that those open issues have been properly remediated. If there are management actions, have those management actions been effectively implemented? And in some cases, senior management decides to not completely implement the actions, and senior management does their own risk assessment and determine that we're going to go with the risk and come up with the rationale for taking that risk. The intent of a follow-up audit is just to validate, and this is done on a sample basis, but it's to validate how effectively we've remediated items and if those remediation controls are properly working. District-wide audits is the next audit that we do, and those address processes and functions that touch all district departments, or functions and processes that touch most departments within the district. District-wide audits are designed to gain economies of scale, and they do that by taking a very broad, high-level, district-wide view of a particular function. Evaluate the implementation of policies, procedures, standards, and best practices across the district as a whole. An example that we typically give is PCARs, where we look at PCARs across the district, and that would include PCARs issued to schools and to school departments. The next audit is the individual function audits, and those focus on unique scenarios or unique processes within a specific department. Individual function audits may also focus on processes or scenarios within several departments, but the operative word here is they do not target all departments in the district. And if we continue with the P-card example, a P-card audit of food services will focus on the risk and controls for transactions related only to food service. Then we have cycle audits. Cycle audits are very narrow in scope, much more narrow than district-wide and individual function audits. Cycle audits are very specific to inherently high-risk, decentralized functions and processes. They provide testing and reassurance that policies and procedures are being followed within different departments, that controls continue to be effective once it has been determined that they are appropriately designed and implemented. And from time to time, we do go and look at the design of the controls to make sure we've got it right. And a good example there is property control. We've had, for a number of years, we've had continuing improvements in property controls, and I would credit that largely with some of the cycle audits that we've done. There are additional internal audit projects that are performed. And those projects focus on areas of functions that are high exposure and high priority based on risk ranking. The internal audit special projects that address solutions of potential situations rather, potential situations outside of our existing audit plan that the board, the audit, or the management of the school board may become aware of. Internal audit special projects and requests are generally specifically defined and narrowly focused. And some examples are some things that happened with Augalie High School where we had to go in and do some deep dive and digging. And the transportation department, we had some issues that we worked as a special project. And both of these turned up items that needed to some further investigations and actions. If you look at 2018, 2019, you look at our follow-up audits, our district-wide audit, our individual audits of the half-cent surtax. If you look at some of the additional things that we did, internal accounts, the pharmacy review, whistleblower complaint, all of these have been completed. If you flip to the next page, 2018, 2019, follow-up audits are complete. District-wide, purchasing is complete. Internal and external penetration tests are in progress. We've looked at Legacy Academy, we've looked at the half-cent sales surtax, and we've completed the internal audits for fiscal year 2019. Fraud awareness has not yet started, but this is where we are for this current fiscal year. One of the things that I'm most proud of is results. And this chart shows results. We've had 170 audits completed since the inception of this committee in fiscal year 2000. Of those 170, 35 were cycle audits, 36 were district-wide audits, 70 individual audits looking at high-risk areas, and 29 were additional audit projects. Follow-up procedures conducted and reported to the audit committee. We've had a total of 377 total corrective actions that have been reported since the inception of the audit committee. 98% of those corrective actions have been validated and closed through the formal follow-up process. Another thing that we're especially we're especially happy to report is that we've made some significant improvements. And those have been gained by somewhat stepping outside of the internal audit function, but ensuring that when we find something that touches several departments or several areas, that we share those lessons learned, that we go and address training, that we go and ensure that that knowledge and that information gets spread across the district. As well as if we find a best practice, we make sure that those best practices are shared across the district. So I think these are the kinds of things that makes this function effective. So what are we going to do this year? In September, we had our off-site workshop and training, and Mr. Slate, we're going to have to get you up to speed. We do have a new members package, and I don't know if you received one of those yet or not. But we do have a new members package that has a lot of information. As well, RSM will sit down with you and kind of run through the process and get you up to speed on.
Does that mean he doesn't have to take the exam at the end of this since he didn't get the packet? Or should we make that?
No.
We'll go ahead. Okay.
As long as it's not a 3-day exam, I'm okay with it.
We've got a baseline here, so we're going to do that today.
Okay.
Our next formal off-site training is scheduled for September 3rd, 2020. And the reason for these workshops, one is to make sure that we're all pretty much on the same page. They also allow us to put anything on the table that we think can add to or improve the process. It's very informal, and so far it's been very effective. This year we will again do annual evaluations of the internal auditors as well as the external auditors. And in my mind, this is ultra important, is that we give these guys a report card on an annual basis. So if for some reason we're unhappy, they know we're unhappy. And we can allow them to go do whatever corrective actions they need to do. But we're happy. We are very happy. The documentation of the external audit RFP process is being completed. It was completed in late 2014, but we still brush that up and touch it up as we need to. The internal audit process, we did some brush up on that in 2018 as we went through the process again. The internal audit and the external audit contract recommendations, we will be making those to the board. And we're looking to continue with improvements in how we function and how we identify and prioritize and manage our action items. Again, this is one of the things I think that has allowed us to become a better group, is that we don't lose sight of things that we need to do, things that we said we're going to do, and we hold ourselves accountable to ensuring that we get things done in a timely manner. We also will continue maintaining sensitivity to opportunities for improvement. And this is part of our continuous improvement process. The health sale tax accountability, we will support that as required. RSM, I'm happy to say, have been more than just go look at how the health sales tax group is doing. They've also shared information with them and helped them to improve their processes. So this has worked really, really well for the district. We still have an open item to look at our charter to see if there's an opportunity to make some improvements, but we want to be smart about it. We have a very good process now. Process can always be made better, but we need to look at it with deliberation and not be hasty. I'm happy to report that in terms of our goals and objectives, we're 100% complete. And not because we keep the bar low, but because I think we're very diligent in approaching our goals and objectives. And I've done that quickly, and hopefully I've got the southern drawl, talking real fast. Hopefully it came across okay. Any questions? Okay.
Covered it
Very
all
thorough, sir.
beautifully.
Okay. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Oh,
Can I say one more thing?
absolutely.
I think most people know that I've got a situation with my daughter, and she has an epidural set up for this morning. She doesn't drive, she's in a wheelchair at this point. So I'm gonna have to book out of here so I can get her to the pain management over in Mare Island. But I'm gonna stay as long as I can. Ms. Belford.
Yes, sir. All right. If there's no board discussion, then we are scheduled to move into the regular audit committee.
The only one that has to stay would be you, and I don't think you can start that meeting until 10 because it was advertised.
We advertised to start at 10 because usually this discussion takes a lot longer than it did today.
Yes. Okay, so you want me to recess the joint meeting until 10 o'clock? Okay.
And you're coming back, but we're not? Is that what I just heard?
Correct.
You're welcome to.
No, I know. Can I say one thing before you adjourn?
You can say whatever you want.
I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership and Don Lusk and RSM. We discussed this in our board evaluation the other day about how the turnover in our departments and at the top, both the school board and many of our district leaders, has been an area for risk, and having the ability to come back to you guys with some of those experiences that you've had throughout the years is amazing. I referenced to Mr. Lusk when we were having an issue with Legacy Charter, and he remembers going all the way back with Barbara Murray, and he was talking about some of the stuff they were dealing with back then, and that insight is amazing. Mr. Slade, I think it's going to be great having you on the addition because we have some healthcare concerns in different areas, and you'll be able to bring that expertise to it. But in general, I just wanted to say thank you for what you guys have done for a long time, and I really appreciate you guys. And please don't go anywhere. We really need you guys. Thank you.
And don't forget Nicole.
No, Nicole is amazing. I mean, do you want me to go around? You want me to go around the room? I can just keep going. I mean,
Thank you.
Nicole is been on the board now for a year and a half, right?
A little longer than that now.
2
Yeah, I
years?
was gonna
How
say.
long?
4 now.
4. So you've been on the same.
I fly under the radar, don't
Mr. Susan is
Thank
nothing
you.
if not appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you. If
I would like to say a couple of things. Go ahead.
No, please.
Well, first of all, for the people that's new to the process, this process has evolved, and I've been here for a while, and I intend to stay as long as I'm wanted. One of the things, well, a couple of things that I need to make sure you're aware of. In 2000, check my dates wrong. Sometime in 2000, maybe 2012, when Governor Bush was in office, the Brevard County School Board received the Sterling Award, and the Audit Committee was very prominent in the write-up for that Sterling Award. We have also been benchmarked by other school districts. This process has been benchmarked by other school districts. I don't think we, as the members, can take all of the credit. I give a lot of credit to the school board because they've been very selective, in my opinion, of bringing people onto the board. Typically, we've had CPAs. From time to time, we've had attorneys. We've had forensic accountants. We've had people like Don and myself who understand finances but don't come from the finance world. I'm more of a project management, procedure, and from time to time you hear me talk a lot about that. But I think the balance has always been very effective in ensuring that this process, because we all bring different things to the table. We all have different passions and we all have different groups of knowledge. But for the people that are new to this process, I would say just observe, and I think you're going to find that this is a very, very unique committee, this audit committee. I'm sorry.
If Ms. Belford doesn't mind, I would like to just bring up one topic that is applicable to all parties and as an update, and it saves me individual phone calls to my board as an update, just from an efficiency perspective. The board in the audit committee is aware that we are in the middle of the AG, the every 3-year AG audit, and I had an exit interview conversation with the AG. Ms. Lisinski wasn't here yet. I want to say it was January, right after the first of the year. And they went through some of the potential findings in the audit. And one of them was the finding or evaluation of the finding of not meeting the Florida statute for the district to employ an internal auditor. So it's an interesting, we discussed it at the off-site workshop November, is that right? So I thought I'd provide you an update. It's an interesting, yet another interesting conundrum, if you will. The AG indicated, we discussed the fact that in the interpretation of the statute, Brevard County was actually noted as an exemplar of meeting that expectation by virtue of our audit committee process, the employment of RSM, an external auditor, to meet that internal audit function, and that the audit committee reports directly to the board. However, it has since been determined that the word employ is a literal application of the internal auditor must be a school board employee.
Can I interrupt and say I'm not so sure that it has been determined, but it has been interpreted by the Auditor General's office to indicate, because I still contest that.
Yes, as do we. So in my conversation with the AG, it was interesting. I pushed back on the change of interpretation, and his response was, well, understand that all of these go to the AG to review all of these findings, and then, I don't remember who our AG is,
Tim Tucker.
Thank you. Well, he's our local, but like, it goes up the chain to,
David, somebody.
in any case, and they either validate the findings and they stick, or they dismiss the finding before the final audit is presented to us as district. So he indicated it's gonna go up the chain, and not sure if it will stick or not. I want to be transparent about the fact that it was identified as a finding, but even in my conversation with our local AG, Tim Tucker, not the highest level of confidence that it is where it is gonna stay. So I don't want to suggest, we, as a district, we have not moved forward with the employment of an internal auditor. One, it will be at a considerable additional cost to the district, but not because it isn't valued or important, but by virtue of other districts had been building their model around that statute against Brevard, and us not making a hasty decision. We have been standing on our current structure. But if it comes back that we must employ, then we will certainly reevaluate, because we want to be as completely and openly transparent with all of our finances, every element, aspect, and perspective of the school district. It's not a matter of that. It is just trying to balance fiscal responsibility with our statutory requirements and so on. So we're waiting to get word back from
Cheryl Norman.
AG Norman, and then we'll be making a decision from there. If the audit committee recalls, and for the board, we had a quality control or quality assurance function in the district that could have potentially been modified to meet that internal audit requirement, if that's what happens. The positions dedicated to that function were vacated probably close to a year ago now, and I made the decision to not fill those positions in reevaluating the function, reevaluating the alignment in the organization, and then shortly after that, then came the AG, or the audit, and so those positions continue to remain on hold, if you will. They have not been cut from the budget, but they have not been reallocated as well. So just wanted to provide that status update and just be completely open and transparent about where we are with that particular function as it relates to the audit committee.
Can I say something as follow-up?
Sure.
So when I worked at Greenberg Troy, we did the legislative intent research for all of them. And when we found inside the committee that the legislators were saying this is what it, and when it's in print, it supersedes any opinion that goes on, because it's the intent of the law. So I think we're on good standing for what we're doing. And just what Art was saying, we became a model so that that's why we were referred to in that committee. So for them to turn and reverse that, I think maybe part of the process is for us to reach out to the committee that developed that, because it was a committee substitute bill that was brought up, and it was referred to in a staff analysis in that committee. Those gentlemen can give testimony and give legislative intent that supersedes the Attorney General. Just a thought.
When they do make a determination, did they indicate a time frame?
That's what I was just going to ask next.
Right.
Good point.
They didn't. I met with Tim Tucker and
Tucker and Claire Waters.
yes, no, it was two gentlemen. I think the other side was
Kenny.
Mark. Yeah.
Mark Kenny.
Did they? That was in January, I want to say.
I think mid-January. It was a couple of weeks after we came back from the break.
And they were sending it up the chain from there. It was the preliminary findings of the audit. So I don't have a timeline. Kara, could you Ms. Lisinski, follow up and find out when they anticipate bringing something back to us?
I'll send Tim an email.
I would also add to that how long we have to respond. I mean, if they make a determination, are they going to give us a month to fill that role?
Well, I did go further with my little bit of pushback in that the statute came out, I believe, I think it was in legislative session 18, applied to 18-19. We thought we were in good standing in 18-19. And I said we just renewed a contract with RSM for 3 years, I believe, or not renew, but we did a new contract, I said, thank you, Mr. Edwards. This shift or suggested shift in the interpretation of the law comes at considerable financial impact to the district. So I said I would ask at the very least we be given time to live out the contract with RSM and have the opportunity at that time to reevaluate the allocation of dollars and its role with the audit committee. He said, I think his response was, I understand your request.
Okay.
So I don't know what that'll mean when it comes down to the end. We may be obligated to, you know, and maybe not even obligated, but it may be prudent to, you know, fill that position more immediately or depending on what the position that is. So I don't want to give any suggestion. We're not willing to meet levels or measures of accountability to ensure that our organization is on the right standing. That's not the issue. It's just trying to balance all of these.
When I do recall, when we were looking for someone to fill that quality control or that individual internal auditor position, it took us quite a bit of time.
Yeah. One of the challenges I have is who out there and with what kind of credentials could come in and serve as a all things internal auditor for an organization of our size and magnitude. And if it isn't one person and it's potentially multiple people, now we're really talking about some significant financial impact.
Could we, and I don't know the ruling, could you employ a staff as the internal auditor that reports to RSM? Staff member, would that fill the role, the requirement?
It just has to be employed by.
Yeah, it just has to be employed by, and I think they have to report to either the board or the general counsel.
It says board, statute does.
So, we'll keep you posted. And if we get finding back from the AG before we meet again, we can, Kara, if you remember, we'll send the audit committee and of course the board a update on what that is.
Just a couple things. I won't repeat how I feel about it. I appreciate your candidness and your other words that you use that just sort of lays it out for everybody to see. I appreciate that. That's easier to deal with. You know, I don't know how it works in your world, but you know, the only time you really sometimes in the world that I came from, you have to push back is in that conversation with the auditors, which you've done, push back some. You know, then the next opportunity would be how you reply in writing, but sets out how you're going to resolve it, and that begins at least a written dialogue back and forth. And I'm sure that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You know, and I would just encourage you to, you know, how they decide what the definition of the word employee is. I forget what word you used earlier. They used the most simple definition of employee. However, my mind immediately upon reading was employee means lots of things. You know, so I know you know this, but I would just hope that we push back a little bit and not sort of jettison the system we have that works very well. And I know you agree with me, and that comes in at this particular point in time. So if you need any help from us, not that you do, but you know, somebody to bang on the table or something of that nature to say hell no, excuse my language, then I'm happy
That's
to
your
do that.
guide.
Well, I just, you know, not you, not anybody here. Stupid is stupid. You know, sometimes what comes out of Tallahassee can be stupid. Sometimes it's very good. A lot of times it's just stupid.
Well,
I feel better now. Thank you.
I understand cathartic moments.
it creates a system that is with less oversight and less experience.
Right.
And I think that when the intent of the legislature was to create this, it was to go the other direction. And so I keep going back to intent. And I think that if we went to the individuals that made the law and said, this is what you created and this is what the AG is doing, there would be a strict conversation over what that means. You know, this happens all the time, the interpretation, but you're exactly right. We get one guy in here or two people. Their experience is limited to the scope of what they've had in the past and what they can do. When we bring in experienced individuals, those are top shelf individuals from across the country that RSM brings in to audit. We don't get the same level of expertise, and it really upsets me that they did that. So Don, thank you. like, we didn't talk about this, by the way, before we got here. He just kind of thinks along the same lines. I love this.
It does present a lot of questions, even if an internal employee reports to the board or the general counsel, they will be an administrative oversight by me and or my other staff. It just is a compromising position for that function. The separation of duties and accountabilities with a scope of expertise at a firm like RSM, it just seems to provide the highest level of accountability, autonomy, separation of influence, if you will, and those types of things. But we will continue to ask the right questions. Mr. Slade, did you?
I was just going to say, it's an independence issue as far as I'm concerned. An internal employee lacks a bit of independence that you get from an external operation.
Yeah.
And we did share those thoughts when we met with the AG. Well, not the AG, but when our local AG people came to meet with us, we did share those concerns as well.
We're there.
Any further discussion? Board members? None? All right, seeing no further discussion, I will adjourn the joint school board audit committee meeting.
Call the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the November 21st minutes. Can I get a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, ready for the question? Taking cues. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes pass. Next on the agenda is the ICOC annual report.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sue Hand, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Facilities Services. You've seen me here before. Typically, we have one of our ICOC members, typically the chairman, present the annual report. He and the other officers of the ICOC were not available this morning, so you get the B team. But at any rate,
Hardly the B team.
Well, yes.
She is the A++ team, as far as BPS is concerned.
For those of you who don't know, though, our ICOC members are very, very engaged in the process, and they do a lot of work on oversight. I think you all would validate that statement.
Absolutely.
So don't misunderstand their presence, or their lack of presence here as not being engaged, because they truly are. I'm going to talk about the annual report that we provide to the school board every year, but before I do that, I want to hand out a document, just give you an opportunity to kind of take a look at it. This is not the annual report, but these are copies of facility assessments that are completed. And this will be part of my presentation to kind of tell you the story of this document, but I wanted you to have a copy while I talk through the story. I think Kara had provided you with a copy of the annual report that we provided as the ICOC to the school board. Mr. Schifrin, our chair, presented that to the school board in December. And then we also have an obligation per the ballot language to provide that annual report to the audit committee. So that's my purpose here today. So just briefly, these are our ICOC members. Roughly half of our members have been with us since the inception of the ICOC and the sales surtax in 2014. We do have some new members, but they represent a wide variety of folks out in the community, and has been a really good sounding board for us as we talk to them about different projects and programs and priorities for our sales surtax resources. This is just an excerpt from the charter, so if you're not familiar with the ICOC, this is their charge. So they do a general oversight of our sales surtax program. They do not have approval authority per se, but when we have issues or policy questions or just things we're concerned about, we do bring those questions to them, and they, as I said, have been very engaged. They've been particularly helpful in our security arena. That's probably one of the bigger policy issues that came up early on in the program, where the initial investment was relatively small, and we found that we had a much greater need for security resources, and we worked with the ICOC to make a recommendation to the school board to advance the security projects using the resources that were allocated in the facility renewal bucket, which was a whole lot bigger, and that allowed us to be successful in putting the security assets in the field a lot sooner. Our annual report covers these areas. Just going to highlight several of these for you. So talking about priorities and needs, the surtax program was established back in 2014. And the key piece of data on this slide is right here. It's 22% funded. If you look in facility renewal, back in 2014, the facility assessment indicated that we needed about $722 million worth of work. The resources that were allocated out of about a $200 million sales surtax program over 6 years is about $157 million. So you can see we're at 22%. Now our resources have been a little bit more, but certainly nowhere approaching the $722 million. The educational technology piece is pretty much on target, and the school security piece, we funded that at $5.7 million. It was about 2.9% of the revenue of the surtax program, and that was by design early on in 2014, and we have found over time that that is not enough. So we have allocated more resources through the ICOC's recommendation and the school board. This is the needs assessment. This is where we are right now. We realized through the course of the sales surtax program that our needs assessment in 2014, which was done primarily in-house with a tremendous level of effort, had some shortcomings. And so we worked on how we could do this differently and better and get a handle on our assets. In the district, we really didn't know how many chillers we had, how many air conditioning units we had. We don't know how much stuff we have. We talk about having 12.8 million square feet of buildings, but we don't really know what are those components that we have and how frequently we should be maintaining them, what condition they're in. So we hired a firm that comes in and has a really robust software program that we can use to manage our assets on an ongoing basis. So rather than the point-in-time approach that we did in 2014, we now have software that allows us to update. When we put in a new chiller, we put in a new air handling unit, we update that data and we have a real-time perspective on what our assets are. So we are really moving into a new generation of facility asset management in the school district. And so I wanted you to see these. These are just examples of completed projects. And you can see that there's a current replacement value, there's an assessment as to what is needed in year 1, year 2, year 3 through 5, and year 6 through 10. So it's going to allow us to do a much better job of capital asset replacement and renewal programming going into the future. And these are site-specific by school. We have a multi-pronged team that goes out and actually does the assessment, including the folks from Canon Design. They are a professional assessment firm, and we bring our maintenance folks in, we bring folks in from the schools, we look at our work orders, and we try to make sure that we are capturing everything that is happening out in these schools. So I'm really proud of this effort, and I think this is going to help us make better data-driven decisions moving on in the future. So let's see. Revenue. Our revenue picture has been very strong for the sales surtax. The program was estimated at about $198 million back in 2014. We are at about $218 million as of the end of January. Our revenue is about $3 to $5 million a month overall. And we're tracking at about $56 million over what our original projections were for this point in time. We estimate we're going to have about $72 to $75 million more than the 198 that was originally projected. And we've been working very closely with the ICOC to program those resources. This is just a chart that kind of shows the monthly revenue over time. And you can see how the revenue varies by month, but you can also see that over time it has continued to climb. Year over year between 2019 and 18 is about a 2% delta from month to month. So we're continuing to have a good revenue history in the sales surtax program, and that has worked very well for us in terms of being able to invest those resources in our schools. Right now, this is the estimate as of, I think, early January in terms of the projected revenue over $198 million. You see it's a little over $72 million, and we're continuing to track that. We do now really, every time our ICOC gets together, which is every other month, We bring them projects that need additional resources, and they help us facilitate a conversation about how we invest those resources. For the most part, we have brought them primarily facility renewal projects as we were trying to wrap up the end of the school-based projects this coming summer. But we've also been talking with them about additional security investments and additional technology investments using these resources that are above and beyond what was officially programmed. Oops. So this is our expenditures as of January 31st, and you can see in overall, we're spending and encumbering about 82% of our revenue. This is another piece of data that I'm particularly proud of. We have these resources coming in and they are getting out into the schools. So this is not a program where our revenue comes in and sits around. It comes in and we get it back out. This time of year we are gearing up for our summer construction, so you'll see that number start to climb as time goes on through the spring. Our expenditures by type, this shows you kind of how we allocate our resources. And you see we're very heavily weighted in contracted renovation. We're doing big projects. Most of our projects are in the $1.5 to $6 or so million range by school. We do a little bit of computer replacement, that's in here, a little bit of site improvements. Those are things like fencing primarily. And then you see our professional fees are about 10%, so that's pretty typical in the industry. Our in-house administration, this is permitting and our staff that supports these activities, and that typically runs 1% to 2%. This is also a particularly good thing. We use the owner direct purchase program in the district, so when we buy a chiller or big pieces of equipment, we manage to save the sales surtax per the state owner direct purchase program, so we don't pay taxes, sales taxes on those assets. And we've purchased over $21 million worth of stuff, and we've saved $1 million and change, which we can then redeploy into the program. So that's something else that has been very effective in this program. In terms of getting the work done over the last year, this shows you the project distribution. We have finished 58 schools. We've done a lot of investment in educational technology, and we have completed the original security program, and we are continuing to add security features in collaboration with our district school security staff. We anticipate that we will finish or substantially finish most of our school projects either this summer or this coming fall, and then we will do some of our ancillary facilities that were also included in the sales surtax program. In terms of how we invest our facility renewal money, you'll notice this is super heavily weighted in air conditioning. That was our big need identified in 2014, and that's where the bulk of our facility renewal money has gone, supplemented with electrical and a little bit of building envelope. If we are to consider a future sales surtax program, you'll see that chart probably start to change more heavily weighted towards roofing and towards classroom renovation. Those are our needs now. The prior program in 2014 included a very specific program of work and did not include things like flooring, bathroom renovation, paint, all of the kind of the second tier activities that we might do in facility renewal. Those were not included. So this is all the big stuff that came with the first program. Audits. We have the pleasure of working with RSM twice, well, I was going to say twice a year, but really pretty much continuously. This is, I think you'll be seeing audit number 9 today. And so they have been a big help in talking through some things that we consider. Working with them in terms of like communication has been something that you all have brought up. We have engaged the ICOC and engaged our communications team here in the district. That's been a function of you all talking to us about those issues. So we appreciate that we have that relationship with our auditors where you all give us some advice, we talk about it, and we work through anything that you see might make our program stronger. Just so you all know, as the audit committee, we also do construction auditing of all of our projects over $1 million. So in addition to the program audit, where you are looking at whether we're reporting correctly to the ICOC, We also have our construction auditor, CRI. They come in and they audit our projects against the contract to make sure that we are paying bills in accordance with our contract requirements. And those are done on every project over 1 million. And then I typically will pick one project per vendor that is under 1 million to audit that as well. So we have a lot of audit history in the sales surtax program. And oops, that's it. Conclusions. So this is where our chairman usually talks about all the good stuff that we've done, but I feel that this has been a really good program for Brevard. The sales surtax has made a huge difference in our schools. We have air conditioning in places where really it wasn't functioning too well back in 2014, and it's been a big success. And so I appreciate everyone's attention this morning, and I guess I should mention we have great support from Cindy's department in finance as well as purchasing. We couldn't do what we do without those folks. It has been just a wild ride with all of you. We push about $45 million or so a year through the projects funnel, and your team supports us quite well, as does purchasing. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Not a question. Yeah, a question. So this is just Mylar.
Yes, there's going to be approximately 100 of these.
Wow.
Yeah.
All I can say is wow. I mean, I don't know that there's very many public facilities that ever have been measured this way. Maybe it happens everywhere else. This is my first experience with it, but I mean, principals are not facility managers, and neither some of the times is the superintendent or others. So this is great. I mean, it really gives you a idea of what would need to be accomplished. So,
if I can add on to that, it has been a couple things. One, phenomenal effort on the part of facilities. They went out and procured an impressive software program and opportunity. They came and trained us how to do it, but then Sue and her team somehow has integrated the assessments within her current staffing and has ensured that there has been no gap in the assessment and then real-time updating it as projects have happened the day after the assessment was done. So sometimes when we're in the process of inputting data, if we're not careful, there can be a lag, and work will have been done during that lag that then doesn't get captured, and it compromises the real-time or the authenticity of the data. But by Sue's leadership and her team, we've ensured that that isn't the case. So that was done at a moment in time, but you can go to the online version and see what the current status is. It's all integrated. There is cumulative spreadsheets by virtue of, what are our most critical needs? What is our preventative maintenance schedule for all of the assessed facilities? So I think by summer you'll be done with virtually all of our facilities across the district.
Yeah, the data query functions are really powerful. So if you want to know what roofs do we need to do in the next 5 years, a couple buttons and magic happens and we get that answer. And so it's going to be really powerful for us.
It's great.
So I'll just do what the chairman would have done if he was here, which is best practice. Good job. I don't know anybody that's doing it any better. So I do think that lands on your shoulders and your great team. So thank you. I know some places it could be used. Can I make a couple of suggestions where you can go to use this? I'll just leave it alone. But I don't know where this was back in my day. So.
Well, Don, we've known each other a long time
Yeah.
from our county days, and I agree. This is kind of state-of-the-art in facility asset management, and I'm proud that Brevard Public Schools is a leader in that regard. So,
If I may, the committee may recall, we had an approved audit of maintenance on the plan for this year when we approved the risk assessment last year. But after meeting with Sue and understanding the depth that her division is going through in putting together this assessment and what kind of information she's going to be able to glean from it going forward, this impacts her staffing models, it impacts capital budgeting processes. This is a game changer. So this is coded purple. It is postponed, and rightfully so, because of this major initiative that they have undertaken.
Do we have a time frame for when we're going to put that postponement will actually take place? Put it back on the audit?
I think we'll just keep in touch and keep monitoring the progress, and we can bring it forward to you all if we decide that it's time for an audit.
we also had the DOE audit
Right.
this year, so our entire department was audited by DOE concurrently.
EAG.
all these audits going on.
So do you want this back?
You may keep them for the day, but if you just leave them for Kara before you leave today, I'd appreciate it. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sue.
All right, on the heels of that, next up is the half-cent assessments audit.
So this is our 9th round of our half-cent report, and just to reiterate and refresh everyone about the purpose of these reports, our role, the audit committee's role, is to validate and send the internal auditors in to vouch the reporting that the district provides to the ICOC, so that the ICOC can perform their due diligence. We have a very specific and very narrow role, and we continue to do that to support the ICOC in their function. So with that being said, this is Matt Blondell. He's a manager and a construction expert in our RSM practice, and he leads the team in these half-cent, twice annual reports.
All right. So starting with the transmittal letter on the reports in front of you there, we've got a paragraph that we've included just sort of as an executive summary relating to where we are kind of currently. The period that was covered in this audit was from July 2019 through November 2019. In our last round 8 report, of course, we reported that at that time collections had surpassed the original projection of $198 million. Obviously that changes a couple of things, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the history there. Of course, you've been seeing the presentation that Sue just gave to kind of provide a little bit more context there as well. But pending the completion of a facilities assessment, which is currently underway, and the separate security assessment, funds that are being collected in excess of that $198 million are now being held and spent on an as-needed basis through recommendations that the management brings to the ICOC. And whereas previously funds were kind of funneled into separate accounts for security, educational technology, and facilities renewals. So we're in kind of a limbo period. Funds are being kind of held in a contingency account and being dispersed on an as-needed basis until those assessments are completed and a final accounting or recommendation of the split between different projects is approved by the board.
If I may add to that, we are also in the process of concluding a district-wide security assessment, and that third party will be presenting out to the board in the next 30 days, which will then contribute to decisions of the surplus, if there would be if the board would like to allocate some of those surplus funds to specifically district security within the scope of the original charter of the surtax, single point of access and or access control. So part of the intent of putting the funds in reserve is to wait until that security assessment is completed.
So then in the executive summary, we just showed that as of November 30th, 2019, the collections had totaled $217 million and expenditures were about $140. As Laura mentioned, our role is to test the reporting that comes from management and goes to the ICOC, which of course ultimately goes up in the audit committee and board and available to the public, and specifically related to revenues that are collected, making sure that they've been that we're vouching it back to the bank statements and making sure that it's accurately reported in the right period and so forth. Expenditures, that they're in accordance with the referendum. As Dr. Mullins mentioned, not being spent on things that weren't originally approved. And then making sure that, of course, accounting and the reporting is accurate. And then on the procurement side as well, making sure that the contracts that are being used for these funds have been procured in accordance with relevant statutes and policies. At the bottom right, you'll see we have 3 green checks for each of the areas. We did not have any exceptions noted in the current period testing.
We like those checks.
So I'll move on to page 3, which talks a little bit about the public perception program. We had previously reported on phase 1, which was the district's initiative to provide public awareness and communication as the surtax program progressed. In the February ICOC meeting, the Government and Community Relations Department presented phase 2 of that communications plan to the ICOC, which involves the bullets that are listed below. Continuing on the social media campaign that was started in phase 1, and then involving the Legacy Club as ambassadors and to host events, and then targeting digital advertisements, press releases, newsletters, and so forth to specific areas to provide information on schools that impact those particular residents, their home schools. And then, of course, there's going to be a speaker training session to allow people that are speaking on behalf of the surtax function to have a standardized presentation methodology. That was recently presented. Just wanted to provide some context there. On page 4, as we spoke earlier, after the last, right at the very tail end of the last period, the district had surpassed collections of the original estimated 198 million. The current proposed reallocation is 50% to school security, 15% to educational technology, and 35% to facility renewal, which, as you can see in that table there, differs, kind of flips the facility renewal and security on which one gets the heavier dose. But again, that is pending approval by the board, which is, of course, pending the completion of the security assessment and the facility assessment. Moving on to page 5, we have just some similar tables to what Sue showed in the ICOC packet that show the budgeted versus the actual surtax revenue and a table that accompanies it. The only thing I'll draw your attention there is that the last row is for fiscal 19-20. It's just only a portion. They look smaller because it's only a portion of the year, not the complete year. Page 6 shows a similar table, but with respect to the expenditures and the breakdown between the expenditures of school security, educational technology, and facility renewal. Page 7 is some more detail on our specific approach and methodology. As we mentioned, really it's validating the reporting that comes from management to the ICOC to validate the accuracy of the reports there. And then moving on, we're on page 9 now. This is the specific results and the specific procedures that we performed for each area. 9 is revenue. So step 1 there for this round is not applicable. As we mentioned, that was where we were previously making sure that the funds were going into the proper accounts that were split among the 2.9% for the security and the other percentages, so forth. Right now, they're being accumulated into a contingency fund pending, approval on an as-needed basis, and then pending the facilities assessments. We recalculate the collections and make sure that they're tracing them back to the bank statements and make sure that everything is accurate there. We didn't have any exceptions. We had previously reported on that transfer that was sort of that loan or transfer from the facility renewal fund to security to expedite the security projects. During this testing period, the transfer was totally repaid. As collections came in, the security was repaid back to the facility renewal funds. Page 10 details the results of the expenditures testing. That's where we see the expenditures that are listed, we trace them back to the school reports, we confirm that they're accurate and making sure that they're in accordance with what was approved in the referendum, and that they're recognized in the proper period. And step 5 there is for this round not applicable. It relates to labor allocations. Internal costs for labor for Sue's team are allocated to individual projects. It varies sometimes biannually, annually. As of this period, it hadn't been done yet. It is a very small portion, so we don't see an issue with that, but we will, we test those allocations when they are made to the individual school projects. And then page 11 is procurement. This is where I mentioned that we test for the procurements of the related contracts that are funding for providing the services for the schools that are in the surtax program. During the period, there were 4 contracts awarded, and we tested 3 of them for compliance with statute, making sure that they were competitively bid. And it's important to note, the procurement, even though these might be for the surtax program, it follows the standard procurement policy that the district follows. And so we're just checking to make sure that everything is done in accordance with policy and statute, and we didn't have any exceptions there. And then page 12 and beyond is the appendix, which was our original and our first couple of reports background section, which really provides sort of the original layout of the referendum and the surtax program. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions if you guys have any.
The one comment I'll add, we had great discussion with Dr. Mullins and with Sue and with district leaders this round about what this audit is designed to do. And it is not a compliance audit like when you think of internal accounts, we test a very small sample and any exceptions are reported through. This tests a very heavy sample of expenditures, revenue items, et cetera. We're to the tune of what, 75% coverage? It's extremely deep. So we are looking for a materiality, and are the reports materially correct when they are provided to the ICOC? And those green checks represent that yes, they are. This does not mean that we might not find $10 here, $20 there, what have you. And we provide those real-time results and feedback to leadership so that they can make real-time adjustments, which I know Sue has expressed appreciation for. We do find those, but it's not going to give you a red X because those are immaterial to the ICOC's decision-making based on those numbers.
And Laura and the team and Matthew present to the ICOC every time. You see one of these, they see one of these too. We have great dialogue, as Sue mentioned. They are a great volunteer group of citizens and are very tentative to us and appreciate us coming, and I don't know, it's quite impressive to go there and see the level of detail that they talk about and analyze and the input that they provide to Sue. So we hope that as auditors and by providing these reports that the citizens can see how diligent the school district has been with these funds, and with the marketing that they can actually see where the dollars have gone for our kids.
I will say, when I saw it on the agenda today, I was quite excited because it's always a clean audit. It's always very detailed, and I thought, yes, no problems today. So, thank you guys. Next up, we have, does anybody have any questions? Any additional questions? We have the follow-up report as of February 20th. Okay.
So annually, we report back to you all the status of any open audit items. We go in, we do some testing, we work with management, the process owners to establish a status of where the items are as of our testing. And if management is ready for us to go in and test and see if those are closed, then that is what we do. This round, we tested 3 reports: transportation, employee recruitment and onboarding, and timekeeping. And purchasing, you'll recall Christy was here presenting at our last meeting. That one will be due for follow-up at our next follow-up round. Page 2, this is our matrix giving you an overall status of the reports that are in follow-up status, how many have been issued, how many have been closed, how many are still open, and any that have passed their estimated completion dates. That is what ECD stands for. So we performed testing on timekeeping, and this one is closed. I'll walk you through the details. Employment, recruiting, and transportation were also tested. We have a couple updates to those, and purchasing is highlighted in peach so that we know that it's coming next time. Page 3, timekeeping is a report that we issued several years ago. I believe it was 2012, probably before my time here even. And one of the issues that has remained open for the audit committee to continue following up on is related to the manual process at the district. This is a common theme for many processes throughout the district. We've also had several conversations here at this committee level about updating the software, possibly district-wide. ERP, gap assessment we brought before you, as well as a couple other items. So this, we felt, and in collaboration with Dr. Mullins as well, we feel like this particular audit finding really is just one risk that has come before this committee related to a bigger discussion about an ERP and automating systems district-wide. Because this is not something isolated and it is part of a bigger discussion, we feel it's appropriate to close it here in this follow-up process, and the district can continue to update the committee as you see fit on their discussions related to ERP. Dr. Mullins, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add to that.
No, we've put some enhanced timekeeping practices in place. It's not perfect, it's not risk-free, but again, it's part of a larger discussion, and quite frankly, a very costly corrective action that we've got to plan some years out. So that's why we are continuing to implement the enhanced procedures, and I don't know what the right terminology is, but the level of risk against our current ability to manage it was at an acceptable level.
So we're going to, you'll see on the risk assessment and next year's audit plan, proposed audit plan, a cycle audit of timekeeping. So it's been on the plan, it's a big investment, the district, I don't see it in their future from a budgeting standpoint within the next 6 months, certainly. So what we'll do, as Dr. Mullins mentioned, they've put in manual controls to mitigate the risk. So now it's time for us to go out and see if those are working and hit those departments that carry the risk with them. For example, transportation, food services, where you have hourly employees that have different schedules and calculations, and certainly, touch some unions. So in next year's audit plan, we'll be proposing to look at some timekeeping and do some cycle audits there.
Are all employees on the timekeeping system, manual timekeeping system?
They are all manual, yes. Everything is done manually, but not all employees are hourly. That
Right.
makes sense.
Right. 9,000 employees.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's lots of paper.
I am hearing that we're comfortable this year that we have mitigating controls in place, and you're comfortable with the controls in
They've
place.
put controls in place. We have to test them to see if they're operating effectively, and that's what we're going to propose next year.
Has there been anything in the past that has indicated there might be issues with the timekeeping system?
Yes. And you can see this date, 2012. We were in 2012, and pretty much every year after that, looking at doing individual detailed testing. We worked very, I want to say 4 years ago, when Dr. Pace was here, they put a lot of manual controls in place around timekeeping, thinking that the day was coming when automation was in the future, in the near future, and since that's not going to happen in the near future, it's just time to move forward and start the testing.
Have you had any significant findings?
In the past?
Every year.
Yes. So
Moving on to transportation.
We're gonna follow up on this. I know you're gonna propose it. I don't wanna lose track of it.
it's going to be, so at the next meeting, we'll propose the internal audit plan, and it will be included in there as a cycle audit.
Okay.
Moving on to the transportation audit. We performed this original audit a few years ago. We did a deep dive into the procurement and the parts room in those areas. We have since been able to close, I believe, 9 of those issues. So they have done some significant updates and changes to their processes and procedures. You may recall last time we came here and presented to you, it was a full scope follow-up audit that we performed on that transportation department because of the significant changes that they had made. Part of their plan for remediation included implementation of a fleet management information system to help mitigate these last couple remaining audit issues. Since then, there has been some turnover in leadership at the transportation department level, also at the COO level. And FMIS has been put on hold until folks could get their feet on the ground. Now that those folks have been in place for some time, that is back on the table. And I believe they have gone through the procurement process.
We have. They've gone through the procurement process. They're now doing final negotiations with the contract and the implementation and so on. Unfortunately, the reality is the cost of implementation has grown from what was previously allocated as budget for it to include what was originally allocated for the cost of the FMIS was originally allocated in LCI funds, and we're getting clarification from was looking for the DOE whether or not we can spend those funds from LCI on that kind of purchase, and if not, then we have to look at operating fund, and so there are some budget elements that we have to address. And what was not built into the original proposal was a maintenance. So there was just presented that there's a anticipated annual $50,000 a year maintenance cost associated with the FMIS. So it is likely being rolled into our budget process for 2021 fiscal year because of some growing fiscal implications. So, but we're in the process of trying to negotiate it and know exactly what the obligations are going to be for the district. And ultimately, what you saw for facilities assessment, the expectation is that will become what we see for transportation.
So for now, these remain open, since implementation is foreseeable in the future. The first one relates to business operations monitoring. We reduced the original risk from this finding from high to moderate because they've put in some manual processes to track certain metrics. There are additional metrics that the district would like to track that they will need to automate to do so. So this remains open for now, but the risk is mitigated. The second transportation finding on page 7 relates to core charges and credits and warranty revenue. The district is hoping to track this through their automated system. This has to do with when you purchase certain parts that have a core charge applied to them. When you return those parts, the district gets a credit back or a revenue back. So in the meantime, since we are waiting for implementation in order to automatically track those, we have been working with the district to help create a manual process as a stopgap. And that's all we have on transportation. Moving on, and Dr. Fetty, do you want to come up? No? Moving on, starting on page 9, we did follow-up of our HR recruitment selection and onboarding audit we brought to you all about a year ago. If you recall, Dr. Fetty was brand new to that seat at the time of this audit, and this was really kind of a education process for all of us about the status of things as she took her place over there. These were some major rocks that we had discussed in our original audit that we acknowledged will take some time to close, as these are major decisions to be made. So we went back, we checked on her, it's been a year, and we were able to close a few things, which was very positive. And I know she has a few items that are already in progress as well, which I'm sure she'll expand on some more.
It's not that different than what happened with transportation. It's a little deja vu, right? It takes so much time, and for those of you who were here during the transportation audit, you recall all of those 11 high-risk issues and all the work that it took to close them, and we're down to 2 issues now, which is really extraordinary. The district, all the things that you have to deal with, that level of concentration, and so now it's happening in human resources. So the movement, we feel as auditors, and the progress that has been made is really, it's great. It's very commendable.
So walking through these, number 1 relates to metrics and performance measures. As she was new in her seat, Dr. Fetty needed some time to gather data and to benchmark against leadership's expectations, the board expectations, et cetera. And this just takes time to gather the data and understand where your baseline is at, which she has done so and has put some manual tracking procedures in place. So we continue to have this open because she's refining her process as she gathers additional data. And Dr. Fetty, chime in anytime if you have something to add.
So I will. Part of it is, thank you. Part of what we've had to do in human resources is restructure our organizational chart. And because we've had several retirements, we've been able to do that to put a lot of these things in the audit in place. But the retirements started in January and are continuing through June. So that's why you'll still see some things open here and still with moderate risk because we haven't been able to implement them. In regards to metrics, what I found out in coming on board is that data collection can be difficult. And we have identified what is important organizationally to collect and how we're going to collect it, who's doing it, on what schedule. Because the other thing we found is our system is a point in time. So if somebody asks for a piece of data, whether it's teacher attendance or turnover or terminations, it's a point in time when someone runs it. And when you don't document the time it was run, the data will never be the same the next time you run it. So we've had to identify specific timeframes. This will be run on the 1st of the month. This will be run only every July 31st, so that everybody knows where we're getting our information from, where our source is, and if you ask for it off cycle, we can't give it to you because it will not match. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but we did find that. We do date stamp and time stamp, but I'm very hesitant to give out information that we run out of our AS400 system, like teacher salary data, for example. And that is a point in time. If somebody asks for that today and I run it, it will be different than what I give you tomorrow, because we have people separate employment, we have payroll catch up with people, and the numbers will never be the same. So the question always is, why can't we get the same consistent number? The only way we can give the same consistent number is to base it on a date certain. So that's what we do, and I always identify what that date and time is so that we could go back to it later.
So number 2, starting on page 11, manual procedures. At the time that we performed our original audit, Dr. Fetti had walked in and there was a process in place to already implement an applicant tracking system to automate parts of the onboarding process. So since she has been there, I think she's been able to get her feet under her and get a better handle on that project, and has made some changes in the direction. It's still in process of being implemented because Dr. Fetti has her strategic plan in place for how she wants it to be implemented. So if you have anything to add to that as well.
I do. The employee who was originally assigned to the ATS separated employment in September. And after her separation, we realized that it was not as ready for prime time as I may have been under the impression that it was. So I've worked with a vendor because we do have an applicant tracking system right now. It's called Beacon. And what I found out is the development of this process was really just a different beacon. And that's not what we needed. We don't need a different system than what we already have. We need a different system than what we already have. We don't need a new system to mimic our process right now. And so we've had to go back to the drawing board on some things. And stage 2 in this applicant tracking system was to automate some of the onboarding processes. Well, we're not ready to deploy the applicant tracking system at this point, so we can't deploy the automated onboarding. So right now, our onboarding is still very, very manual. We worked out a process behind the scenes that we're working with a particular department and a couple of schools to do an online through a secure site to do onboarding, and we've taken over some of the onboarding functions with my organizational review. That will hopefully, as we move forward, we'll get all the pitfalls out of that, and then until we can get ATS working, we may be able to use this folder system that we've developed with ET to do some more online onboarding, because we have delays. And the delays are noted in the report. You noted things are not getting signed until we finally get them in the courier, and we're trying to mitigate all that risk.
Moving to page 13, number 3, standard operating procedures. Dr. Fetti's team has drafted and finalized, or is still working to complete many SOPs, and certainly significant documentation and formalization of their internal processes has taken place since our last touch point with her. We left this open because there are a few key ones that her management is still working to finish, but by and large, they have completed quite a bit. There was significant progress here. Number 4, we were able to close out. This had to do with training our HR liaisons, which are our secretaries out in the schools and in the departments, so that they understand the procedures required of them in their role. We tested that and had no exceptions and feel comfortable closing that. Number 5 on page 16, new hire and new appointment review and approval. We tested a sample of new hires and appointments, and we noted a couple exceptions in approval dates and things like that, and it's probably a product of the manual process that is still in place. We feel like this will be mitigated once the applicant tracking system and the automation is put in place. Dr. Fetti, any comments on those?
No, you've covered it. Thank you.
Number 6, page 18, calculating and reviewing compensation. This one relates to separating the duties between preparation of a compensation calculation and review of that calculation. There's some challenges with resources in that department, and some duties have been offloaded from the director of compensation, but still working to identify which resource can really take the full reins of this separate duty that needs to be put in place.
I would agree with that. We, like I said, with my retirements, part of my restructure has to do with who calculates salary offers and who gets salary offers and where they go for their approval, and then the final approval being the director. In cases in the past, she was the first, second, and third approver, and that was the exception. And, well, it was the norm, but it was the exception noted in the audit, and that has been, to the extent possible, rectified, but not totally rectified yet.
Since she retires coming up.
No, she's not retiring, but I've had other retirements that have allowed me to restructure my employment group so that I can have the employment group working through, especially non-bargaining. Our director of compensation did all the non-bargaining, so she was the first, second, and third line, and she can't be. That's the separation of duties, so we've restructured that. My third retirement comes in June, and that's when the next piece falls in place.
Moving on to number 7 on page 19, we tested new hire employee files for completion of the required onboarding documents. We had no exceptions, so we feel comfortable closing this one. And I know you all put a lot of work into that. Number 8, page 20, job advertising and job description forms. You may recall the discussion we had on this. This is a huge project, probably thousands of hours for your team to complete updating job descriptions for all the jobs that we have here at the district. They have done some, 16% I think you have here in your comments, Dr. Theddy, but this is an ongoing process that will take multiple years to complete.
What we're doing right now with job descriptions, it started as a project about a year, a little bit before I came on board, where every one of our about 600 job descriptions was supposed to be rewritten in the space of 6 weeks and taken to the board for approval, and that is, that's not something that we can do. So we changed that scope to looking at departments that are reorganizing and looking at job descriptions that are completely outdated, that we have to update through the needs of our different departments, and that's what we've taken to the board. The goal is to finish all of them and to get them all done, but to do that in 6 weeks was not something that was feasible or really even advisable. We're working through it.
Number 9 on page 22, I-9 forms. The district's in the process of putting in an e-verify process for this. So previously it had been done manually. Now they're going to use the system e-verify to automate the I-9 process. That's still in the works, but we will come back and test it. Go ahead.
We've done the training process on several of our employees. They have to take a training course in order to be able to use e-verify. And so we've done that, and we're getting ready to deploy that. Our target is July 1st.
We feel comfortable once that's in place, this will close. And number 10 on page 23, roles and authority levels for salary adjustments. We had requested that the board and the superintendent clarify the roles and authority levels given to each of them for salary adjustments, and we noted that the board policy has since been updated to clarify that role, so we've closed this issue. Number 11, recruitment strategy on page 24. We met with Mike Alba, your director of recruitment, who just was full of information for us, almost information overload regarding what the district has in place for their recruitment programs and their strategy. And it was a fascinating conversation. We feel comfortable that their arms are completely around where they want to be in terms of recruitment, and certainly teacher shortage is always an issue, but they are acting very proactively. So we felt comfortable closing this issue.
But all of our school districts that we go to, like, and we're in Collier, Lee, West Coast, Volusia, Osceola, Miami. Anytime we sit down with a board member and say, what keeps you up at night, their first reaction is typically teachers. We can't find them. So the district completely is on board with this, and I wish we could do more. But I don't know what we can do to mitigate that risk. But it certainly is interesting to see how Brevard tackles it compared to some of our other clients, very proactively.
And that concludes our follow-up report.
Are there any questions? We'll see this again, I'm sure. Next on the agenda is the financial services update.
Right, and there is none. I'm glad to be here, and this has been very, very insightful and very helpful, so I'm glad.
Excellent. Welcome on board. All right, Kara, you ready
Mr. Edwards requested at our last meeting that I create a parking lot so that we don't lose sight of some of our older action items. That's gonna be on the back page of the current ones, just so that you guys see that we've still got a handle on them. Item number 1 from March of 18, Mr. Edwards requested a follow-up on the transportation FIMS system, and Dr. Mullins has kind of given us an update on that during the follow-up report. And I will amend the notes to read that we have gone through the RFP process and are negotiating costs with the selected vendor.
I will leave that open.
I would think Mr. Edwards would want to continue to follow up on that. Item number 2, Ms. McDougall requested that the committee consider an audit of the district's discipline plan, and I have that, as Dr. Mullins is discussing that with the board to determine who will perform this function. And also, Mr. Susan requested that we consider an audit of the district's expulsion policy and process, and that also is being discussed with the board to determine who will perform this function. And I have no added action items for this meeting.
Do we have any last minute items?
If you want to go, there's actually
Would
others
you like
on
to
the
do
back.
the parking lot items?
Oh, okay.
We do parking lot.
We do.
Items that are in the parking lot, so we don't lose sight of them, is further discussion of PTO booster clubs and a plan for club accountability. That is still pending policy review by Cindy, our new CFO, and Mr. Gibbs, our school board attorney.
You know you're coming here to get work today.
That's great.
Ask us to sign.
Mr. Edwards requested a status report on the new ERP system. Again, that's something that is a little bit low on the priority list right now. Noted that in the last meeting that it's approximately 2 to 5 years out on getting that in and implemented. Mr. Edwards in June of last year requested an update on the status of the...
Sorry, Kara, can I just add a note to the ERP?
Yes, sir.
Probably one of the, a significant factor in that delay is, it's a funding challenge, it's a funding issue. It's a millions of dollar commitment, and we're evaluating the funding landscape as to whether or not what that looks like, because there just does not seem to be millions of dollars necessarily coming. So we will hopefully have a better sense of that, what that may look like for the audit committee, maybe at our next meeting.
Update on the status of the quality control department at a future meeting. Allocations repurposed to internal audit to meet auditor general requirements. And I did, Dr. Mullins, get a response from Tim Tucker. Yes, we still intend to report that the internal auditor should be employed by the district, and he put that in quotation marks. Our operational report release has been delayed until mid-April, and that's all the response that he gave. And
Yeah, go ahead. Do we have a meeting with him next week?
yes, on the 17th, and but that's just required communications. It's not going to take any more. It's not actually based on the report that they will issue. It's just required things that they have to tell you and Ms. Belford.
So he's not necessarily bringing back the finding from...
Correct.
Okay.
And our last item that's in the parking lot is Neola policies review to update the audit committee charter, and discussions are ongoing with that. I wanted to also update the committee. You'll find in your packet I've updated the audit committee contact information sheet to add Mr. Slate and to add Cindy. I did neglect in my hurry to put Cindy's email address, but I will correct that and send this out to everyone.
No, that's wrong.
Oh, you're not Amy involved?
Oh, no, you're not in the inbox. I don't imagine that would work very well. So I will fix that, my apologies, and get that sent out to you when I get back to my desk.
Okay. Well, if that's it. The meeting is closed.